Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. Today, I want to talk about an emerging picture of leadership that I think is worth you considering and pondering. And it has come to me, it's kind of been presented to me as a perspective that I didn't expect. And it's come to me by talking to people or people reaching out to me and saying, maybe you should consider this. And it's a perception, it's a characterization of who I am as a person that fits in within a larger characterization of people in general. And I think it's worth talking about, and we should talk more about this. I have known all my life that I was a big picture person. I thought big picture. I wasn't a detail oriented person. I saw the big picture, and the superpower that comes from that is that you can walk into a situation, a room full of people, or walk into a boardroom or something like that, and you can see things happening, and you see the dynamics of what's going on there. And as a result, you have something to offer, which is a perspective and maybe a set of strategies of a way to bring about change. I'm a change agent, believe in change, believe we're all in transition. And I also believe that most of us are fighting that transition, not because we necessarily like where we are, but we just don't know where we're going. And as a result, we find ourselves kind of between things. We find ourselves not really clear about who we are, and yet having a sense of alienation, and yet having people in our lives who care about us. And we see that, but do they really know us? Do they really understand who we are? All those sort of things, I think, are part of the dynamics of the modern world, which causes it to be very confusing. I mean, if we were to apply the VUCA model to personal life, for most of us, our personal lives are filled with volatility, filled with uncertainty, filled with complexity, and filled with the constant demand that we adapt to changing circumstances. And I think the VUCA model was developed as a description of something that was a crisis for many people. In essence, it was a negative. It was a negative characterization of the way the world works. But from my perspective, I see it as a positive strategy. So we live into the volatility. We embrace the uncertainty. We understand and try to make the complexity work for us. And we do that by constantly adapting. And I think where we adapt, the most significant place that we adapt is in our own self-perception. Almost 2 years ago, a woman from Switzerland, Barbara Klebe, who's been on the podcast, reached out to me. This is before the podcast began. And she said to me, "I think you're a polymath." And I went, "What?" My perception of what a polymath was were these people who I think, in my childhood or in my, college days would have called them, oh, they're the people who are so intelligent that can't relate to anyone. They're eggheads, and they're brilliant people, but how do we talk to them? And what I found was, as I was included into her network of polymaths, I found that that's not really true. That these are people that can be related to, and they're very wanting to be in relationship. They want to be in communication, and they have much to contribute. And I found myself finding a home with them, if I could put it in those words. And I think that's a significant. It was a significant change of perception for my life, and I'm very grateful to Barbara for reaching out to me, taking the personal initiative to create an impact in my life that truly matters. And so a lot of the people I'll relate to are people who are considered polymaths, who have a wide spectrum of knowledge, and they're constantly learning. They're very curious, and they're not settled on kind of living out whatever small piece of understanding they have about the world. So they're the discoverers. They're the journey people, the people who are seeking to make sense of the world beyond what the typical understanding is. So I celebrate them. Then just a couple of months ago, I came to this conclusion that I was that I was neurodiverse or neurodivergent, and that really surprised me at first, and then I realized this makes perfect sense because every group that I've been included in throughout the course of my life, at some level, I did not feel like I fit in. I was not like them. I was not typical of the group. I was the outsider. I mean, I base my consulting work on being what I call the intimate outsider. I could come in and see things that they couldn't see because they were so close to it. I could see things because that is, quote, my superpower, so to speak. So here I have these two classifications, which I've avoided classification. I just, what are you? I'm just a leadership guy. That's all I am. And now I say, well, I'm a polymath and I'm neurodivergent. And that my neurodivergency is really in this notion of having this big picture of the world and seeing things that other people cannot see. And so in that sense, I'm not typical. The challenge, of course, for someone who has a big picture is how to see yourself, But of course, that's true for all of us. Whatever your perception of who you are, how you actually are is one of the challenges of living a life. How do I truly understand myself? But what has come from this is the recognition that there are a lot of people in these classifications, lots of people who are neurodiverse, and many of them are autistic. And if you look back at just a short couple of weeks, you'll see my interview with Sarah Kernion, who talked about her two children who are nonverbal autistic. And the beauty of that conversation was we talked about, well, if we can't communicate verbally, how do we communicate? And there are ways to communicate. There are ways of getting around that. And so the creativity that comes when you don't have access to something, you have to try something else. You have to figure out something else. And it reminded me of back in February of 2020 when I was in Benin in West Africa at a conference, a big church conference of about 3,000 people, and I'm one of the presenters. I'm one of the seminar leaders, and here I am talking to a group of about 50 people, and most of them don't speak English. And I've got three interpreters over here to my right. And I'll say something, and then they'll each in turn will say something, And so there's a whole lot less of me going out, but a whole lot more of them going out. But I'm watching them talk about what I've said, and I'm thinking, wow, this is marvelous. And part of that was that two of the interpreters were interpreting in tribal languages. And I was told that one of those languages only has 800 words. So I asked the young woman who was the interpreter, I said, well, how do you say things like I'm talking about, which is, the circle of impact of leadership and organizations and that sort of thing? She says, well, I just tell a little story, and then I tell another story, and I tell another story. And so she's giving illustrations, and she says, I think maybe after I do that, they get the idea. I'm thinking, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So the idea of communication across all these cultural and physical and mental and emotional and geographic barriers has become something of real interest to me. And I believe that there is something to this that is emerging as a characterization of leadership that will replace the conception of leadership that we've been operating on for 200 or 300, 400 years, which is that there are a few leaders and a lot of followers, and the people at the top are the ones who tell us what to do. It's the authoritarian model, which Western governments are trying to implement against us. And when they will fail, not because we resist very well, they will fail because it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it ultimately says that everything can be reduced down to the individual level. And the individual level means I can be in control of everything. And I don't believe that's really true. And I'm more convinced of that than ever. So I see the nature of leadership changing. The first way it's changing is that we have to be very self-aware of who we are and what we have to offer to the world. The second thing is that we need to be operating within a set of relationships, a network of relationships, the way I call it. And that network of relationships means that we're not in competition with one another, but we're collaborating with one another, and we're having to communicate with one another. We need to be in conversation with one another. And in what I've learned, and this is what you all told me through the Eddie Network podcast, is that the unscripted nature of it has opened up avenues of perception about what is possible that didn't exist before. And so this is a turning point. Who would have thought the Eddie Network podcast would be a turning point in human history? But it is a turning point where we can walk into any situation and allow it to be unscripted. And then we together in our conversation create something that allows us to move forward together. That's what I'm seeing. And the third thing is, so the first thing is leadership is our self-perception is changing. The second thing is that the nature of leadership is becoming much more communal, much more collective, and we need each other. It's not so much the individual anymore; it's how we work together. I mean, if you're familiar with Robert Greenleaf's work, he had this phrase that he talked about a team being the leadership of a team being the first among equals. We're all equal, but the person who has the expertise or the knowledge for this particular moment takes the lead. That's it. That was his simple but very, very important idea that was 60 years in the past, and it's still relevant today. And the third thing, which I think is the thing which I've learned through you all also, is that our differences, the things that make us not typical, the things that cause us to feel like we don't fit in, are the assets of leadership for the future. So if Sarah's children are nonverbal, then their ability to communicate is an asset that we learn from, and they will help us to see ways to communicate with people that maybe are not verbal, or maybe they have another kind of situation which causes them to have a different approach to how they're living. See, I'm not characterizing these things as positive or negative. I'm just characterizing them as this is the way we are. And if we don't fit, that's a social thing. And what we want to do is figure out, well, how do we create organizations where people fit? And they fit because they're supported and they feel a sense of affirmation. And they see that, there's a place for me to take personal initiative to create impact that makes a difference and matters. And I see this is the way we should be looking at leadership for the future. And in many respects, this is nothing new for me. I've been talking about this for 30 years, but it is new in the sense that the affirmation of people's differences become the assets of an organization, instead of what I coined this week in a conversation of the systems of typicality. The systems are oriented to create a bunch of people who are typical, and they all do the same thing, and they all do the same thing in the same way with the same result, which oftentimes is a predictor of mediocrity and not excellence. Because if you're going to be excellent at something, you're going to be excellent because you're taking that very thing which is unique to you, that thing that makes you different, and you're elevating it to be the very thing which causes you to make a difference in the world. So this notion of me being a person who sees the big picture, that's it. That is what I'm elevating. So this idea of leadership being different than we thought of it, and of changing it, of changing your own self-perception, of building networks of relationships, and really operate in a culture which allows for differences to be elevated and become the source of strength and the assets of the organization or the community. I think this is where the future is going. And I'm sharing this as I prepare to leave to fly to London for the Ian McGilchrist conference this weekend. And if you are there and if you are available on Sunday, I invite you to join me at the Crown Pub in Covent Garden at 1 o'clock on Sunday, where I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to have a little gathering. People want to come and join me, and I'm going to talk about what I'm just telling you. And then at that point, I'm also going to talk about what am I going to do about that. So I'm going to begin a venture that I think will matter to the world, because more than anything, it will take that sense of difference that you feel about yourself and say, we're going to celebrate that. We're going to elevate it. And we're going to help you find a way to utilize that or express that through your life for the benefit of your community and the benefit of the world. So this is a moment of change. It's a transition point, and I welcome you to join me in this, because I know many of you are already on this journey. I've watched you. I'm listening to you. You're telling me your stories, and you've changed. And this change is only going to happen at a faster rate. So I suggest you think of VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and adaptability as a positive strategy for your life. And if you can see that, then you will see that those four things are ways to learn more about who we are. And they are ways for us to encounter people in the differences that cause volatility and uncertainty and these things. And we find ways to work together to create the change that is needed. So I thank you for watching. I thank you for your support and your involvement. The things that you reach out to me and say, I'm very grateful for. And I feel that what is coming is something that many people will want to be a part of, because it'll not just be another venture, but it'll be a place for us to be able to explore these ideas. Okay, if you're in London this weekend, I hope to see you. If not, then I'll see you here on the Eddy Network next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.